status is considered not endangered. They're not even overfished. They've been on the overfish list a couple of places in the world here and there since they've been starting to keep this data, but nothing really here in Florida. We got great fishery here, and we've got a pretty amazing fishery inside Tampa Bay, especially during the spawn that's getting ready to come up. I know that's why Steve wanted me to talk some about the gathering, the big groupings of mangrove snapper that group up for the spawn. It's one of the times a year, just like any other species, whether it be snook or redfish or whatever, when they're gathering to spawn, they're gaining the numbers. They get in huge numbers, and they are more aggressive. They feed up for the spawn. They become more available. And obviously, when they're more concentrated, they're going to be easier to find, easier to catch, and this is the time of year, especially around the full moons when the spawn is going on, that you can really get some real nice trophy-sized fish. And in here in Tampa Bay, it is no exception. Here in the Bay, we've pretty much got just about every migratory species, with possibly the exception of some of the fish that need to travel a little bit further offshore, like maybe the sailfish and the tuna and stuff that need more water. It's clear water, but I mean everything from kingfish and cobia and every shark that's migrating, everything. So Tampa Bay is a pretty rich fishery in that respect, and the mangrove snapper are no different. And this moon, I got a couple opportunities to get out on this moon that we're on right now here. This June. June is usually the first part of when the fish really start to gather in some serious numbers, and they're doing it. They're here. The fish are really starting to group up. The water is, if you've been out, you know the water in Tampa Bay is really clear. It's crystal clear right now, and you can pretty much go from some of the areas in this, go from structure to structure around Tampa Bay right now, the towers and stuff, and you can see the schools of mangroves that are out there. I saw the last 2 days. There's been some really nice schools. I haven't seen any really super big fish yet, and the big females can, in my experiences, can go to 25, 26, 27, even 25, 26 inches, 27 inches if you catch them on the spawn just right. And it's something that it can take some time to really kind of get it figured out, kind of get it dialed in as to how your particular fishing techniques work with the way the fish orient themselves to the structure and different things like that. But we can talk about some of that stuff tonight, and we can definitely get you more dialed in, or if you're already dialed in on it, I'm certainly open to any of your comments or advice too. If something comes up that you have a question, feel free. I don't claim to know it all. I just know my way. I get a chance to get out in the water. I do fish as a charter captain. I get to get out there a lot, and mangrove snapper is one of those type of fish that people like to catch because they're awesome eating. The limits are still up pretty good on them. It takes 5 fish per person. I know a lot of people that fish inshore, that one redfish or a one snook at times, especially coming off a protected ban. We don't like to keep. We're not trying to keep that many snook, even now. So mangroves are one of those, and mangoes. You may refer to me. I may call them mangoes or whatever, but that's one of those species that's in pretty good shape, and so it really doesn't hurt too bad to go out there and get yourself a nice little mess of fish for dinner. And like I said, it's all coming up, so there's going to be some really good opportunities. I like to start off by just basically some of the. I just mentioned that you keep 5 fish per person. The fish have to be a minimum of 10 inches, and there's no maximum on the mangroves here in the bay or anywhere really, as long as they're over 10 inches. Now, limits will vary. Places you go in the state, you have Florida here, it's going to be 5 per person here on the West Coast, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is over on the East Coast too. And that's part of your over there. It's part of your, I believe it's part of your 10 snapper aggregate, but here it's not. So you can catch, on the Gulf side, you can get 10 yellowtails and still get 5 mangrove snappers, which is a pretty good mess of fish. So anyway, yeah, the snapper, they reach their sexual maturity in only 2 years. From the time that they're born, they can start reproducing at only like 7 inches. 7 to 13 inches is a 2-year-old snapper, and they're able to be part of the spawn and group up with the bigger fish. And you won't find many fish under that size pretty much in the big schools of snapper that we have during the spawning months. And with the 10-inch limit, you're pretty much looking for fish in the at least 14, 15 to 20-inch range is pretty common for the fish we have here in Tampa Bay. And so basically, how it starts for me is you'll with the coming of the full moons and the first quarter moon in the month of June, when the full moon starts, on the approach of the full moon, and we've got the tides don't run quite as hard as they will right up around the times of the full moon, is when the snappers start to become available, and they as they gather, they tend to be a little bit easier to fool when the tide's running a little bit less. When the tide's running really hard, the snapper can get very close to the structure. They'll get in behind the rocks a lot of times, and it's more difficult for you to get your baits in there to where they can feed on them, and you can fool them, because they don't want to get in the middle. They don't want to get in the fastest part of the current. They'd rather not have to work quite as hard. They'll get behind rocks, and they'll get behind ledges, and they'll get behind pilings and stuff like that to get away from those those tidal breaks and stuff like that. But they're as a species, they can get pretty weary too. They're pretty savvy, and they're pretty easy to fool 1 or 2 when you first start fishing for them. But we can talk about some tactics for getting them to where you can actually catch, where you can actually get a few of them and get a decent bag limit. One of the good ways I like to start off with that is chum is something that they respond to quite well. I personally like the really super fine stuff. It's double ground. You'll buy it in a little block. It's maybe this size and about like this, and you just put it in a standard in a regular mesh type chum bag, one that's got some not super fine holes, but at least like medium sized holes. And that chum's got a lot of oil in it, and the fish have got a good olfactory sense, and they kind of respond to the pieces aren't really that big, where they're actually sitting there eating all the pieces of chum and getting fattened up on that. But it's got a lot of oil in it, and it's a really great attractant. Where they actually can't eat when they're small, they grow up on eating plankton and stuff, so they don't mind eating a small piece of chum if it's coming along in the current, it's free. So what we like to do is, because particularly in this time of the year for us, bait is super plentiful right now here. If you guys are fishing and you're any kind of bait fisherman, you know how the greenbacks and threadfins and glass minnows and stuff are pretty solid right now. What I like to do is take a bucket of either really small chum, or the small fish, and just put them in a bucket with no water. You can catch glass minnows, or I'll cut with a pair of scissors the greenbacks or threadfins and cut them up small. And as the chum is flowing off of your boat, what we refer to as sweetening the chum up a little bit by taking the pieces of cut chum, and you're flipping a few of those in your chum slick. You may throw 6 or 7 or 8 pieces, and then give it a minute or so, or 30 seconds or whatever. Throw another piece, and you can kind of see how they respond to the chum. Because a lot of times you'll see them, you can see them come right up, and you'll see the reddish flash as they turn on their side to get the pieces of chum. You'll actually see them shining and flashing like a sardine or like a shiner in the chum slick. Well, which is that's what you're really after. You want to get them concentrated and get them get them grouped up so that they're a little bit easier to catch. And I know I kind of want to bounce around a little bit if that's okay, because some of this stuff kind of works together, where once you get the chum going, you'll want to do different things to keep your bite going and different things to keep the fish interested in the chum. And so, sir?
What's your favorite chum to use? Do you like the frozen chum, or do you like the little glass minnows, or which one is your favorite chum?
The chum I think works good is the chum that's the single ground chum that you put in the wide mesh bag with the big pieces in it will work pretty good. But I like the double ground chum, the one that just looks like a block of sawdust or whatever. It's kind of brown and red, and it's ground twice, and it's really super fine, the ultra fine stuff. That stuff has got, they add oil to it, and it'll keep the interest of the snapper a lot of times as it kind of flows off the back of your boat. Yes, sir?
Where do you purchase that at?
You can purchase it at, I know they had it at Southshore Bait and Tackle over here when they were open, and so bait shops that have frozen chum will normally have that kind. Any place.
Isn't that usually the champion chum, the double ground with the menhaden oil in it?
There's several different companies that make it. There's one called City Fish Chum that makes it, there's one I can't remember the name of it, but it's got a green label, and it's in a white box. It's about that size.
That's what Mahoney has some.
I think they do. I think they sell it up there at Mahoney too. I haven't got any of that since last year, but you'll find that's kind of a tactic that you'll find a lot of times down in South Florida too, where they're fishing for yellowtails, and their mangroves respond to it really well too. And you can especially down there, and I know that the same systems work up here, adding different things to the chum, like oats with menhaden oil in it, and the oats will soak up the oil too, and you can make your chum slick a little oilier by dropping the. Well, I say this as every year when we go down to the Keys and we fish down there, the mangroves down there will make up a chum down there in addition to that fine chum that's made with the single ground chum, a little sand, some menhaden oil, and oats. And then when you grind it up with like a mixing paddle, you'd mix up maybe tile mud with or something like that, and the mangroves really respond to that. You'll have a whole chum of a slick of yellowtail in your chum, and a lot of times when we get our limited yellowtail, we'll start mixing that in with it, and the mangroves just come from out of nowhere, and you'll have them right behind the back of your boat. Haven't tried that here yet, but I'm going to definitely
It works.
work with some of that here in the bay too.
It works.
Yeah, definitely. Being that the snapper can get pretty weary, I recommend that you take as many, within reason. You want to get different types of bait. I like taking shrimp, pinfish, sardines, threadfin, those silver mutton minnows or little silver jennies. I'll go on the flats and I'll rake the grass, and I'll get bait fish anywhere from 2 or 3 inches all the way down to maybe an inch and a half or so. And the snapper will sometimes, the bite can kind of slow down or shut off a little bit from time to time. And a lot of times shrimp can bring them back on. Like if you're catching them on greenbacks and they kind of turn their nose up to the greenbacks, usually shrimp will get them going again. And then once you get them biting again, you can mix it back up again. And like when they're biting on the shrimp, then you send the sardine back in there again. I call greenbacks sardines, but anyway, I'll refer to them as sardines from time to time. I don't mean to be confusing, but I like, especially for the medium-sized snapper, the bigger ones, the sardines work really, really good. And then, like I said, a good size, a medium shrimp will also, they'll eat that pretty readily too. And like I was talking about how they can be kind of tentative and they can be kind of a little finicky. The water's really clear right now. I was using 15-pound leader day before yesterday. I was using some 15-pound fluorocarbon, and I was making the leaders about 5 foot long, actually. Because if you get, the way it is with me is you have to hook them to lose them. So if they're not biting, tackle and they're biting, you can usually find, just the difference between 12 or 15 or 20 pounds can make the difference. They can see the 20 pound on certain days, and they won't be able to see the 15 pound. And there's days when they can't see the 20 pound. If you can, especially when they're running a little bit bigger, you want to be able to use, the 20 pound leader, or when we get into talking about catching the biggest ones we have here in the spawn, you're going to have to use 30 a lot of times, or 25, just to get a fish of that caliber to the boat. But right now, the fish are there's a whole bunch of medium-sized fish on a lot of the towers, a lot of the reefs and the structure and everything out here. And so I'd recommend staying around 15 or 20 pound tests. If you had to go down to 12, I guess, if it's a bright day or something, or a real super calm day, but 15's been working pretty good. And I like to tie my rigs where I don't have any terminal knots. And I like to just use a regular system like you'd use inshore. You're going to want to use a uni-splice going from your main line to the leader, or an Albright, or some type of a no-name knot, or something where you're going to actually join the two lines together without using a swivel, because it's a lot stronger. And especially when you're downsizing those leaders, you want to make that knot's going to become your weakest point. If you tie it to a swivel, what's going to end up happening is that's right where it's going to break, is because that knot that's clinched there loses over half of its strength, and when you get if you get a 18 or 20 inch fish on, unfortunately that's right where it can break. So what I'll do is I'll use a uni splice on the 15 or 20 pound leader, and braid. I like using braid. As long as you make your leaders nice and long, it's okay to use braid. I kind of like braid because you can feel them biting it. The braid doesn't have the stretch that the mono does. You can actually feel them, and they can kind of be finicky when they're biting it from time to time. When we get into the part about actually catching them when they're spawning, they hit it like a freight train, and they hit it. You'll think the fish is this big, and it'll bow the rod down. You'll be like, oh my God! It'll come up and it'll be 17 inches or whatever. When they're pumped up on that spawn, they're fat and they're super aggressive. They bite better, they fight harder, all that stuff. But sticking in the grain for now of the snapper, the medium-sized snapper that we have here now, I will take a split shot, a quarter ounce, a big split shot, like a quarter ounce, or even two of them, or a 3/8 split shot, the larger ones, and clamp that on the leader, so that you don't have to tie the weight into your rig. Or another method is to take a quarter ounce weight, up to maybe a half ounce weight, and just let it slide on the leader, and let it slide all the way down to the hook. That's a way that when you're trying to get down in the water column, that rig will get to the bottom, and as you put a little scope in your line, your bait can swim up off the bottom and have some distance between the weight and the hook, and creates a real natural presentation. And thirdly, as shallow as Tampa Bay is, we catch some of our biggest snapper on just free lines, like you're free lining for a snook or a redfish. Even in 15 and 20 feet of water, you want to have flat lines out there that just have a sardine or a shrimp or whatever on without any weight at all. Or a chunk of cut bait. When you're chumming and you have that cut chum that's streaming out into your chum, you just keep your bail open, bury a hook into that chunk of chum, and of your actual, let's say particularly you're cutting up sardines to use to sweeten up your chum. Take a hook and put it in that piece of cut bait, and just let the bail open and let it stream right through there, just at the speed of the chum. And some days that's probably your best tactic. When they're hard to fool and the water's clear, a free line piece like that, or when the water gets a little darker and you're down on the bottom with the small weight, has been the ticket, and that's been working pretty good. Tiger?
Do you use a jig head at all for them? Can you use a jig head for it?
I have, and you can use small circle hooks too, and jig heads. You can use jig heads. I'm not really huge on using jig heads inshore, just because I'm not, for whatever reason, I haven't used it that much. I've used it offshore. I've used it for grouper, and some days at the reef, I know that the jig head will actually get more. It can get more bites. The color, especially when the water's not so clear, seems like can cause a little attraction, maybe be a little something different. When I do use a jig head, I like to take and rig it on, with a shrimp or with a bait. If I'm using a shrimp, I'll take the hook of the jig head and I'll go up from the bottom of the head of the shrimp. Let's say this is the horns of the shrimp, the crown sticking up. I'll go in from the bottom and let the jig head lay like you would normally hook your soft plastic or whatever on it, with the shrimp laying naturally from the head, hanging back. Or, crossways through the tail's another way too. When I'm using shrimp, I like to hook them on one end or the other, usually through the last hinge, sideways through the last hinge of the tail, or up from the bottom in the carapace up in the front, and it just makes the shrimp flow along at a very natural type presentation. And a jig head would definitely be a way to get it down or get it to the bottom, and certainly you can experiment with that too. That being said, I like to use the lightest amount of weight you can get away with. And spots are different too. Your different spot type structure, spots that you're going to fish, whether it's a ledge or a rock or the edge of the shipping channel or whatever it is, the way the bait gets presented to these particular types of spots can make all the difference in the world. So even if somebody tells you, or you get intel about an area or something that's holding fish, you're going to kind of want to experiment yourself and kind of learn your own tactics are always going to be the best, in my opinion, and the way I've learned things is we all no matter even if we think we're doing it the same, we all kind of do things a little bit differently just by the nature of how we do things, and the way you do things, that those little subtle differences can really make the difference in presentation and stuff, and your knots and so forth. Yes, sir.
I haven't heard you say, so that's why I'm asking. Are you anchored in letting the current carry your chum and your bait, or are you trolling?
Yes, sir. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Basically, that's a good question. Basically, what I like to do is I'll anchor up current. They're generally up current. There are days when we'll anchor down current. There are times when, if you're going for a certain area to fish in, like in a special situation, and I go back to your question, is if you're in a situation where you've got a ledge or something that's running a particular direction, and let's say the wind is not allowing you to stay up current the way you could feed it, the way you want your lines and your bait to go. Sometimes you're kind of forced, if you want to fish that area, to kind of go to fish up current, and that way we maybe cast and let it come along with the current. But normally I would get up current from whatever structure or the area. There's a lot of the towers out here are holding up.
The shipping channel towers, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, those ones that are just off the shipping channel, the old navigational aids out there, those will hold a lot of snapper from time to time, and all the any hard bottom and turn like channel edges and good drop-offs, places where the current's going to get slowed because of the structure. Those are real typical places for the snapper to be too. So let's say you have marked a spot or whatever, and you want to try to set up and fish for some snapper and chum up some snapper on it. What I like to do is get up current, and the two things: you get up current, and you get your chum going in the direction depending on the speed of the current. If the current's going a little faster, you're going to want to stay back from it just a little bit more, because you don't want your chum and stuff to bounce over the top of the go past it so fast.
Time to get
Yeah.
down in the water
You
column.
want it to be able to cascade on down and sink through the water column, because the snapper will come right up. They'll most times when you really get them chummed up good, they'll leave the areas where they're at down there in the rocks and stuff, and they'll just sit right in your chum. You can see them a lot of times sitting right in your chum. Day before yesterday, they were coming out from the tower, and they'd get up away because they like to be in the shadow in the dark part. Well, they would come racing up out of the shadow and get in there and get in the chum and eat a few pieces, and they turn right back around and kind of go back in there. So depending on what's happening each day, use all that stuff to your advantage, and when you're chumming them, you see them coming out that way, then, kind of fish with everything going into the area where they can, get, find your bait and eat it, and whatever's working, obviously, stick with that too. So that, excuse me, and that, would be, so now you're posted up from the structure, and you got your chum working, and you've got your cut chum you're sweetening it with, or your glass minnows or whatnot. Now, another thing I like to do too is I'll have someone, or if I'm with the 2 or 3 people or whatever, you can kind of throw off to the side and let the bait move. If you're using the lightweight, let it bounce along at the speed of the current, or as close to the speed of that current as you can. A real natural presentation is something moving along in that current. If it's stuck in the current, not going to be as natural as if it's sliding along with everything else, because you have every blade of grass and every crab and every piece of bait, everything's all moving with that current. So, that's going to be a real natural presentation. Now, there are times when we will have, if you're familiar with these, the artificial reef that they have here in Tampa Bay, there's the one out here at the Southwest Fish Haven, the one down here at Port Manatee, there's one at Lake Marquis, one at Pinellas County over by downtown St. Pete. There's some pretty effective methods for pulling in some big snappers on those reefs too. And in that case, I will sometimes anchor up from the structure, but a really good way I found it works well is you can get take some light rebar or some rigid band of aluminum or something, and bend yourself a little grappling hook. You don't want to put your $150 fortress, you don't want to drop it down into the structure over there, because you're not going to get it back a lot of times. But if you take some light rebar, and what I did was I took it down and I had just an eye bolt welded on what would be normally the wrong end of the anchor. So now you got your grappling hook over here. So in the middle of the hook, you got the eye bolt, the eye part of it, and the other end's just a straight shaft. Well, you tie your anchor tie your rope to that eye, and then just bring it down along the side of the shaft. And you can use some 100-pound test. I would take zip ties, 3 or 4 zip ties, and zip it to the bottom of it. And then when you get up above that real high relief on those piles, when you're watching for it on your sounders and stuff, just drop that grappling hook straight down right into the top of that structure there, and the wind's not blowing too hard. And you can hook to it, and you tie yourself a real short anchor. So now you're suspended directly above those real aggressive piles. I've seen them dumping cars down there with the windows bashed out of it. Can you imagine if the fish goes in there? It's not going to be very easy to get it out of there. So now you're suspended up above those piles of structure. And on the isolated ones, what we'll do is now you're like above this bottle, and you're up here, and around it you've got like a sandy bottom with a big pile of debris or pile of structure in the center. As the tide starts to slow, especially on the incoming tide, we'll throw shrimp or whatever up current and let it slide along the side of those piles from up current, and let it move with the current on both sides. And a lot of times you'll find a spot where you can get bit before it gets in that structure. Obviously, you're going to have to take some extra tackle, because you're going to get hooked a lot. Anytime you're fishing in structure, you're probably going to hook bottom quite often, and you're going to need to either be able to tie quickly or have some hooks tied to leader material made up already, so that you can just splice it into your main line, drop another split shot on it or whatever you're using, and flip it back out there. This tactic works really good down there at the Port Manatee Reef, especially at the end of the incoming tide. On the south end of the reef down there, as the reef starts to get broken up, there's some isolated piles down there that are really big, and they hold snapper and grouper, and there's Goliath on them and all kinds of stuff, tarpon swim around down there and everything. And we'll generally take a small weight, and you'll find a spot. Like, we'll start off just like you would if you were like panning out for whatever. We'll throw to like 1 o'clock, and then we'll go to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, all the way around until you can find a spot where you'll hit a fish and you're able to get it up over that pile, because you got to raise it and real quickly and try to get it up So, and that tactic has really, really worked well for me in the past. But you just have to, like I say, it's gonna take some time. It's not, if you just wanna throw your lines out and wait, that's not gonna be as good, because you're gonna really have to work with that. And as the tide slows and changes, you gotta constantly be evolving and moving with it, and when you'll keep your tactics working to be successful, something like that. So sometimes most of the time we anchor up current if we're fishing on a ledge or a pile of fish that we've marked or something, but that's another good way that works. And the whole thing with the eye bolt being tied the wrong way is when your anchor gets hung, the worst case scenario is you tie it to the boat, you break those zip ties, and it just pulls it out backwards, and you'll get your anchor back about 90% of the time on it. So,
I just want to kind of step on what you said earlier about how the tide movement.
absolutely.
One thing that we do is I have a bunch of different cameras that I'll send down. I have a GoPro that I send out. One thing that we've noticed when the tide is ripping, those fish literally sit on the bottom and they don't move. They're doing everything that they can just to stay in that one little spot.
To get out of the flow as much as
Yep.
possible.
And as soon as that tide stops, you'll see them just come up off the bottom and just sit there and swim around in a giant school. And that was one thing that I learned, especially with the camera. I kind of knew it beforehand, but seeing it on camera really kind of reiterated the fact that that's exactly what they do. All the fish do, the grouper, the snapper.
When you see it, you know it, and that's one of the reasons why that anchoring to the top of the structure pile works so well, is because if you get there a little early, because obviously you want to be early rather than late, and the current's moving pretty good, you might not get bit for the first 30 minutes or hour or whatever, but as that tide starts to slow down more and more and more and more, those fish branch out further and further and further from the structure, and you'll go from 40 casts in a row where you didn't get anything, and then 5 or 10 casts in a row, it'll be a really nice snapper, then another one, and another one, and another. When you find a spot where you get one, that just keep working that spot. We'll even bring somebody over from the other side of the boat a lot of times and gang up on that one area if you'll find them between the piles or something. Because just like Todd was saying, that's exactly what happens when that current starts to slow down. And down there, especially I like it on the incoming tide, they just get further and further and further out from the structure. And when the tide's slowing and a bait comes in front of their head, they eat it. Steve, you got a question?
Yes. How much is the difference is it going to make since there'll be a blue moon in July?
I really am not sure what that is. I know that in my experience, when you have these special type moons, it usually is pretty good, or better, or at least the same.
Well, I guess the biggest question is, do you think that will continue to spawn? Because obviously the first moon in July is very early. And the second one is late, obviously, since there's two. But I just wondered if that would extend it some, or they don't.
Honestly,
They know as much about the moon as we do.
Oh,
To be truthful, you know.
honestly, I don't know. I don't really know. Just I can't really. I don't really have any opinion on whether it makes a difference or not. But I think if there was 2 moons or 5 moons or 1 moon in July, they're going to be spawning and they're going to be aggressive on all of them, because that's one of the hottest times generally. We're a little early. This year it got hot quick and the water warmed up so fast. Snook fishing and everything was so awesome, but it was pretty short-lived as far as our 100 fish days didn't last very long here because of the fact that the water warmed so quickly. And it's one of the things we really hate to see here, because we're in a part of the bay where the fish are going to go to some cooler water, and they're great while they're here, but they moved out rather quickly because of the early spring. And in every report I've got, and I was just in Louisiana fishing too, and it's early there. Everything on the Gulf Coast is really running very early this year. And the spawn and the snapper, the aggregation of snapper generally can go into September. So it starts usually in June and will go generally into at least August, and a lot of times into September. So if it starts early, it could conclude early, or it could be a long season. Did you have questions?
Yeah, when you see a rock pile, like for like a seawall, or like this rock pile up here that branches out, is there any special area that you fish, or do you just
anchor up and start chumming?
Generally, the current, whichever way the current's flowing can make a difference. Or if I was to just to suspect, let's say I just see a rock pile or somebody tells me about a rock pile, my first thing would be, if depending on how fast the current's moving, to get to an area where there's at least some type of an eddy created or something where there's a break, where the current, if the current's running fast on one side of it and it's not running too fast on the other side of it, my guess would be where it meets or possibly where it starts to slow on the other side would be normally, and then when the tide really slows, probably all around it if it's holding some kind of fish, so holding any kind of fish.
Okay.
And Bill,
If you had a choice between fishing the Skyway Bridge structure and fishing structure in the bay, which would you recommend, or which would you favor?
well, me personally, being from here, I spend a lot more time, because I leave out of Little Harbor pretty much every day. So I spend a lot more time from here, from here, and I go north sometimes, and I'll go south sometimes. So I get to spend a lot more time out here than I do around Skyway or south of the Skyway, and I just am more familiar with the areas up here, from Fort Manatee to here, or from the Skyway here is kind of our stomping grounds. So I prefer the waters inside the bay just simply because I know them a little better. I'm sure there's probably really good structure down there, and I know there is. Expect like in the A range, right by when you come inside the Skyway in the A range on that the St. Pete side of the channel there, there's awesome structure there, and there's huge boulders there, and all those hold fish. It's just a matter of a little bit less fuel, a little bit less time, all that stuff getting there.
The only thing I'll warn you about fishing the Skyway for mangrove snapper, you gotta fight off the dolphin. They'll come up there and steal your fish in a heartbeat.
That can be at Port Manatee too.
Yeah, I mean, they are vicious out there. Absolutely insane. Yeah.
So let's say you're out there, you're doing your snapper fishing, whatever, and I've done some with artificials lately, and I don't catch a whole lot of fish, it's usually one, maybe two in a spot, but it did pretty well on that. But let's say a cobia comes up in the mix, and you're fishing artificials, what do you want to have this time of year rigged up if the cobia shows up?
Tube lure.
Well, you mean strictly artificials?
Well, we'll do the hypothetical situation, if you're fishing live bait, you have every live bait in a live well. But let's start off with the artificials. What do you want to throw if the cobia shows up this time of year?
The cobia, I fish a lot of live bait, because when you're fishing with customers most days and stuff like that, live bait's a little easier to use and stuff. A large sardine has been pretty awesome. The cobia, there's still, quite a few cobia around right now, and a really big sardine or some type of a large bait fish like a thread herring or something that catches the cobia's eye is a good bet. A pinfish, cobia seem to really like pinfish and large shrimp too. A big shrimp, especially a big shrimp, that they're easy to keep. You can have it in a bucket or whatever, and if you're going to be out doing some fishing like that, you're going to use artificials, you can keep a couple of 6-inch shrimp in a bucket, and if you see a cobia, they'll generally, especially if it's nice and lively, they'll usually eat it. As far as the artificial goes, what I've seen happen a lot of times, especially in the winter, is I've seen them eat rays quite often. They eat small rays, like pretty readily. I've seen them at times where like especially at the power plant in the winter, where you can throw every artificial, you can throw shrimp, sardines, everything, and especially on the really big cobia, and they'll just cruise along on the flats, and you'll see them eat a ray the size of a paper plate, in their travels as they go along. Somebody needs to invent a lure that looks like a stingray,
Hoagie has something similar to that. I think they call it a flute.
They do.
It's
I know
it's not that big.
when we go offshore and we fish, or we're around the sky when we're fishing, you want to catch a cobia on an artificial? Is that what you're asking?
A
Strictly artificial?
black eel's good too.
Yep, the black is a black tube lure. It's like a little black hose. Literally, it's about that long with a regular J hook and almost looks like a stinger hook on the back of it.
It swims like a snake.
And it's swim. You just chunk it out there and just sit there and work it like you would do a regular jig. And for some reason, they actually go insane over it. Insane. Every time that we've seen one, we always have one rigged up on your regular, like a tarpon rod or something like that. Chunk it out there and just work it. You can throw it and hit it on its head, and it's still going to eat it. They're not scared of anything. There's many times that me and my brother sat there and threw a bait and laid it directly on top of the fish's head, and all he does is turn around and eats it. Every time. So throw it directly at it and just work it like a regular jig. But you can pick them up. I know Mahoney's has some, and O'Neill's has some. You usually get 2 or 3 to a package.
They've got a jig that they use a lot in the panhandle, but it's got a pretty heavy lead head on it, and it's basically a large bucktail with an eel attached to it. And I can't remember what it's actually called, but those work good. And up there, they use them in chartreuse and white and black, and that's cobia central up there. But they do work quite well up there.
If you have a snapper in your chum slick, how do you target the larger ones? Do you think they're deeper or farther back?
Generally, that's a good question. I was just about to get into when we really start to target the bigger snapper, but generally when you get them into your chum slick like that, they can run pretty much the same size, but you know that you are correct. There can be obviously some bigger fish in there. What's worked for me in the past, especially in South Florida and down the Keys more, is you take one of our tactics down there, and I haven't tried it up here. Maybe somebody can tell me if they know if it works here. But when we mix up that sand chum, a lot of times when you're using the fine ground chum and you're sweetening it with the chunks of chum, it sounds like a lot to do. We'll take a ball of that sand chum and make a little small ball of it, put your bait inside of it, and just set it on the water. If it's sticky enough with oil, you can just let it with the fishing pole, open the bail of the spinning reel, and just let that cruise through the chum, and then you'll see the snapper picking off the little pieces all off of it, and then it gets back into the school and all that stuff wears away and you got your chunk of bait back there. And we usually fish that with an open bail. When we're free lining, we will generally fish with an open bail when we're free lining too. That's one of the tactics that can work good when the tide's moving quicker, is if you get them chummed up when the tide's moving a little faster, you can have your bail open, and if they hit it with no resistance or eat it with no resistance, they'll run off, and you'll just see the line get faster and faster as it runs off the spool. And then after they run off with it, you just shut the bail and reel down on them. And usually you don't have to set the hook or anything. You just reel it tight, and then they pretty much they hit them on.
The sand balling does work here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
we use the Perino tropical fish food though, instead of the sand.
Right.
We put the oats with the menhaden in it,
Sure.
make it in tight balls, and you'll see on the bottom machine, you'll see the fish come off the bottom. So it does work here, yeah. It does the same thing it does in the Keys.
We'll even take a few sandballs too, even without a hook in them, and we'll drop a few sandballs in here and there too, just to get them used to seeing them sandballs going through the chum slick a lot of times too. But here, my methods and what I've been most successful on really catching the biggest snapper, the really big ones, is there's a couple of bait fish that will go out to where the snapper are spawning. I want to kind of shift gears now to the times when the actual spawn is really going on, when the fish are just right in the heart of the spawn. And basically, what happens on that is, as the full moon is approaching, up to about 4 or 5 days before the full moon, it can even be 5, 6, 7 days sometimes, and a couple of days after the full moon, what happens is the moon. You got your daylight for all the daylight hours of the day, and then the moon is gonna shine for the rest of the night. They got this big 3/4 moon, almost a full moon coming up every night. So when the spawn is really going on strong, what happens there is, as the moon gets up high in the sky, the urgency to spawn becomes greater and greater as the moon drops down in the sky as the night goes on and on and on. So what happens is, about 4 or 5 days, 6 days before the day of the full moon, that moon will set. It'll go through the sky and set and then it'll be real dark for 5 hours before the sun comes up in the morning. And then the next day, it'll be dark for 4 hours before the sun comes up in the morning. Then it's an hour different each day. So 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour different each day, where there's only 5 hours of darkness, 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, of the real dark time, and the rest of the time either the sun's up or the moon is shining. So what happens is when the snapper are really spawning heavily, they'll spawn all the way until the time that moon goes down and sets, and then they just gorge and they feed heavily in that dark period before the sun comes up, especially right after it sets. So when you want to target the biggest snapper, the ones over 20 inches and stuff, and the male snapper that you'll catch will all be between 15 and 20 generally when you find a spawning like that. And if you get a female snapper, if you get one in the boat, they're usually, every one of them is over 20 inches usually. And so what we'll do on that is the tide always coincides with that too. That's the end of an outgoing tide generally as that moon goes to set. So as the tide slows and the spawn is gets to its end, they'll get the end of that tide, and then when it turns around and comes back in, the bite is on. The feverish, the very, very frenetic bite is on the big snappers. So when you kind of learn the places where, and they do this at Port Manatee Reef and out here at this reef too here, the edges of the shipping channel. Port Manatee shipping channel is a good one because the current runs opposite the way the shipping channel runs there, and you'll have the 20-foot wall. You're up there in 20 foot of water, and then it just off in the good rock piles and stuff that are there at the edge of the channel. The snapper are all piled up down there, getting out of the current, so they're over the edge of the channel there. So basically, you'll catch them on sardines, shrimp again, but at that time, pretty much, you take pinfish. You'll get pinfish or those silver mutton minnows, those silver jennies, what do you want to call them? And the snapper, a lot of times, the big snappers will just attack those out of aggression. They're not even attacking them to eat them. When the moon's up and it's coming to that point, you'll put a pinfish down there that's 2.5, 3 inches long and throw it in there where they're spawning, and the snapper will just bite a triangular shaped bite out of the top of the pinfish's head. And then they won't touch it again unless they just drill it a couple of more times. They're not even eating it. It'll just look like you boiled it in a pressure cooker. It'll come back and every scale will be knocked off the top of the fish, and its eyeballs will be knocked out, and it'll just be killed for just no other reason than get out of here, buddy. We don't need you here right now or whatever. When that's happening, you can hook the pinfish in the back of the jaws or in the top of the back, and just set the hook whenever they nail it, because they'll hit it hard. They'll blast it when they're doing that. And you can sit there and you'll throw them in one after another, and they'll just kill every one of them that you throw in there. They'll just sit there and they'll just knock that thing out, man. Because the pinfish will go out to those reefs to eat the spawn as the snapper are spawning. And so they attack them out of aggression instead of actually eat them. But then when that moon goes down, the tide comes back in. That's when it's time to step your tackle up to like 20 pound on the reel, probably at least, and be quick when they hit it. You reel quickly and lift, because they'll try to get down. They're a lot like grouper and everything else. They know right where every one of those rocks are, especially those big snapper. They'll get right in the sharp edges too, and they'll bust you off a lot of times. So that thing about that is those now that just comes down to location now. Find the places where they're spawning, when there's a whole bunch of them, they're all grouped up like that, through trial and error, and go with people that know, and you'll find those places. It's and the nice thing about that too is once you find it, not only is it going to happen night after night after night, but on the next moon that comes up, they're going to be right there in that same spot. They're going to be doing the same thing again, and it happens in June, July, August, usually September. Sir.
Yeah, did you say you fish circle hooks pretty much exclusively? And what size do you typically use?
I don't. I like circle hooks for certain species. But I like, if you're going to use a circle hook, especially for reef fishing, I like the smaller ones because there's more to them. There's more, they weigh a little more. There's a little bit more to them. So I just use probably a 2-aught or even a 1-aught when you're using like if you're using a 3-inch, sardine or threadfin or some 3.5-inch, a 2-aught and a 1-aught when you go smaller than that. And I generally like to hook the fish through the nostril if the current's moving at all. When the current slows some, you can hook it directly underneath the pec fins, or the 2 pec fins come down. Pretty good spot right in behind them, but it doesn't bleed much. And you'll usually get a scale on your hook where you knock it off, but you hook it right there, then that's usually a pretty good spot where it keeps the fish alive pretty good, and the hook's under it. So then you put the bait in the water, and he turns over, and he swims normally, and the hook's down at the bottom then at that point. And then the other one, obviously, would be in the front.
Any more questions?
Oh, and just one more thing I'd add to that is that, so if before the full moon, that happens in the morning. After the full moon, that happens in the afternoon. The sun's going to go down, and the moon doesn't come up. The day after the full moon, it comes up an hour after the sun goes down, 2 hours, 3 hours. So the first few days after the full moon, you'll find that same thing going on in the evening, after the sun goes down and before the moon comes up. And that works really good for redfish, snook, and trout too, and probably other species.
Absolutely. Anybody else got anything? Questions? Yes, sir.
Back to the cobia. What size leader would you have out there?
If you're fishing for big, keeper-size cobia, I'd recommend 60-pound fluorocarbon, 50 or 60-pound fluorocarbon. You like cobia fishing?
So let's just say I might have run into one with 20-pound leader on there, but at any rate,
Loosen your drag, especially if it's a keeper and you're planning on keeping it. Loosen your drag and follow it till you catch it. That's the thing, like a lot of times, especially during cobia season here, and I'm sorry, I'll let you continue, but especially during the season when we have migratory species, like we get a big run of cobia and all that stuff and everything, one thing I like to do is, it's always better, unless the drag is just set ridiculously loose for mackerel or something, you hook a tarpon or cobia or something, I try not to tighten the drag. If it held through the first strike and it took off and it didn't break, probably not going to break, especially if the line goes out further. I don't recommend tightening it. I'd rather pull the anchor and follow it.
so they're not leader shy.
No, they're stupid.
Well, they can be though. I mean, there's times when they don't bite as well, and I don't know if it's because of their mood or the leader or whatever. But fluorocarbon, if you're using 60-pound fluorocarbon, it's usually pretty good. Now, I mean, the cobia can go to 70, 80 pounds here in the bay too. So 20 pound on a fish that size, you're risking it wearing through more than it biting through, just because you're going to have it on for an hour. So, and just if you like cobia fishing, still pretty decent cobia around. Yesterday I had these guys from the gopher plantation, and we were trying to shoot a cobia with a bow and arrow, and we saw some. The guy missed like a 40-pounder. This dude is a sniper, and he was shooting sheephead off the towers and stuff, and then he got a shot at a cobia from 6 feet away, and he shot right next to it and missed it. But anyway, there's some out there. There's still some good cobia around right now.
Any more questions? Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.